Here's another video on how to simplify rational expressions, except this time the examples will be a little bit trickier. You may remember we did a couple of these in class, so here's just, your reminder video on how these will work. So when you're working with rational expressions, just remember you always want to factor every single thing you can. So looking at our first example, there's three types of factoring you might see. You could have your GCF factoring, factor with difference of squares, or trinomial factoring. So our first example, that 2x minus 10, that's just two terms. You can take a 2 out of both terms, so that's your GCF factoring. So if we take out a 2, you're left with x minus 5 over. Now this denominator has two terms with subtraction. Anytime I have two terms with subtraction, I look to see if it's a difference of squares. Did we square anything to get both terms? Well, we squared a 5 to get the 25, and we squared an x to get the x squared. So this is a difference of squares pattern. The way that this will factor, we squared a 5 to get the 25, so the 5 goes first, and then we squared an x to get the x squared. So we're going to say 5 plus x, and then 5, oops, wrote it down wrong, and then 5 minus x. Alright, so now that everything's factored, you look to see is there anything on the top that you can also see in the bottom. And what I want to point out here is we have something that looks really close. You have an x minus 5 and a 5 minus x. If those were just switched the order around, then we would be able to do this and cancel them out. Right now, however, they're not the exact same. This is a positive x up here, and this is a negative x down here. It's a negative 5, and it's a positive 5. So if we could take one of those and just change the signs, that would make those match where we could simplify those and cancel them out. So the trick that we have to be able to do this, you can pick either one. You could pick the top one or the bottom one. Maybe I'll just work with the bottom one because I have a little more space. The way that you can make this happen is by factoring out a negative 1. If I take a negative 1 out of just this factor right here, I'm left with a negative 5 plus x. Well, now if you notice, the 5 is negative, just like the 5 is negative up here. My x is positive, just like the x is positive up there. So factoring out a negative 1, that's the trick that makes these match. So let me rewrite what this looks like. Maybe I have room right here, running out of space. So you still have your 2x minus 5 in the numerator. In the denominator, that negative 1, you want to go ahead and put the negative 1 out in front. Your 5 plus x didn't change. But this negative 5 plus x, where we factored out the negative 1, I'm going to write that, but because it's addition, you can just switch the order, which makes it a little bit easier to see that it will match the numerator. I still have a positive x and a negative 5. Alright, now that everything is factored, anything on the top that matches with the bottom, now the x minus 5s match, and we're able to continue this problem. On the top you have left over a 2, on the bottom you have that negative 1, and then the x, well, 5 plus x or x plus 5, you really could write that either way because it's addition. And that's what our final answer is going to look like. Now that negative 1 that we took out, or factored out down here, we could have factored out from the top, and the negative 1 would have gone out front, and you would have had a negative 1 times 2, and you could have ended up with a negative 2 in the numerator up there. And then this would have been, just the positive x plus 5 down there. So that's the trick. You factor out a negative 1. So let's try another example and kind of run through this. It goes a little bit faster once you get the trick down. Can we factor anything out of both terms in this numerator? Yes, you can take out a 2. So you take out a 2 and you're left with 1 minus x. Alright, the denominator, well, if you notice the denominator has a GCF right now, you could factor a 2 out of everything, which makes your factoring easier to do. X squared plus x minus 2. And then are there any factors of negative 2 that add up to a positive 1? And you can do x plus 2 and x minus 1. And that 2 that we factored out goes out in front of everything. Alright, so we have the expression factored, you look to see if anything will cancel from the top and the bottom. This 2 and the 2 will cancel because they're separated by that multiplication. So we can go ahead and cancel those. And then we have that same situation like we had in the last one. Here's a 1 minus x, and here's an x minus 1. So all you have to do is factor a negative 1 out of one of them. I'll go ahead and factor a negative 1 out of here. Now when you factor the negative 1 out, the shortcut is you can just switch them. That's what we ended up with on the last example. You can go through all those steps, but that will be our end result either way. And then you have an x plus 2, x minus 1. Now that everything's factored, anything we can cancel, those x minus 1s are gone. So our final answer will be we have a negative 1 on the top and an x plus 2 in the denominator. So if you see any of those where they're so close to being able to cancel but they just seem switched around, you can get around that by factoring out a negative 1. Alright, so let's go through one more example. Doesn't look like a lot of space for this, but I'll write it down here. So factor everything you can factor. Here, I'll draw a line. 3x minus 12, you can take a 3 out of both terms. That's your GCF. So you have 3 times x minus 4 over 16 minus x squared. That's that difference of squares factoring again. What did we square to get 16? A 4. So we have 4 plus x and 4 minus, oops, I keep doing that. It should be a 4 minus x. Alright, so here you see again, here's an x minus 4 and a 4 minus x. We can fix that by factoring out a negative 1. Again, pick either one you want, doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll factor a negative 1 out of this. Alright, so when we factor that negative 1 out, we know it's going to end out here in front with a 3, so we can go ahead and multiply that together. We know we'll have a negative 3. When we factor the negative 1 out, it will switch those. And then it's over 4 plus x over 4 minus x. Alright, so here's your 4 minus x canceling with your 4 minus x. In the end, we have a negative 3 over 4 plus x, or x plus 4. I really would take either one on those.